Commodore fans, are you ready? It's time for another episode of the Vandy247 podcast on the 440 Sports Network. Keep it locked right here for the best Vanderbilt coverage. Whether it's Clark Lee on the gridiron, Mark Byington and Shea Ralph on the hardwood, or Tim Corbin on the diamond, the Vandy247 crew has you covered. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Also, like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's free and easy to do. Follow the crew on Twitter, Apple Podcast, and Spotify for podcast episodes. Lastly, if you're interested in sponsoring the show, email Chris Lee at chrislee70@gmail.com. And now, pull up a chair. It's time for another episode of the Vandy247 podcast.
Welcome back into Vandy247 live on a Tuesday morning in Nashville. Beautiful Tuesday morning in Nashville, that is, alongside Joey Dwyer. I'm Billy Derrick, and we are talking more basketball. We're going to have Brandon Bigsby hop in here in just a second. And later, so we got a little bit of a longer episode today. Paul Grindstaff is going to give us an Anchor Impact update. Got about an 11-minute interview with him to wrap things up towards the end here. And some notes on the basketball matching gift from Mark H. Carter as well that I think you guys are definitely going to want to hear. There was some confusion there, I definitely from me for a little bit, Joey, but he did a really good job of clearing that up and what that means. So looking forward to that towards the end of this episode. We're talking more hoops, Joey. We are a couple of days away from you heading up to Cleveland at Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse, Vandy and St. Mary's on Friday at 2:15 p.m. local time. Again, just a reminder, that's 3:15 Eastern time, which is technically local time if you are in Cleveland. Joey, good morning. How are we feeling?
Good. I'm leaving for Cleveland tomorrow night. Vandy will have an open practice on Thursday, I think at the NBA arena. I don't know if they're going to go to some random high school around the area, but we'll have content from there. Exciting time for Vandy Hoops, Billy. The site is popping, and Vanderbilt's got a chance to win its first NCAA tournament game since 2012. So it's going to be a really interesting week, and if they can beat St. Mary's, going to have a chance to knock off Alabama after what happened at Coleman Coliseum. So, Billy, it's the best time of the year. How could it get any better?
It really doesn't. And the style of the show today is going to be more of a scouting report, more of a detailed scouting report on St. Mary's. I ended up going back and watching some of their film. By the way, Robbie put this on the board. Bryce Haas, that kid, he's special. Joey, the Belmont GA,
he is so good.
He has dove into every game, I think, outside of Lipscomb and Drake, because he'd be violating some policies there because he's helping out Belmont's team. But he has put out 15-20-minute clips of every team in March Madness with their scouting reports. Was able to watch St. Mary's video last night. Robbie sent out the link on the board. Really good tool, and I learned a ton about this St. Mary's team. Ended up going back and watching their game with Gonzaga as well. So we're gonna give you guys more of a detailed scouting report on St. Mary's. And I want to ask the question: how possible is a Sweet 16 run for this team? And I think that could create some conversation. If you guys have comments or questions, feel free to fire away. I do want to tell you guys about the Wash House before we dive in. They present our basketball coverage. Are you dreading laundry day? Is it stealing time to do the things that you truly enjoy? Well, let the professionals at the Wash House take care of that for you. They've got 2 locations in Nashville. Just drop off your dirty laundry, and their professional attendants can give you back the one thing you can never have enough of, your time. Within 24 hours, you can pick up your nicely folded, fresh, and clean laundry, ready to be put away. Log on to washhouseclean.com or stop in today and get your time back. All right. We'll be getting Brandon Bigsby back in here momentarily, but Joey, I want to dive deeper into St. Mary's, and I want to start with you from what you've seen, because I took a lot of notes on their game with Gonzaga, and I've got a lot in my brain from Bryce's clip as well, which was really good. What else have you learned about the Gales?
Well, I think I learned that probably the biggest key is going to be the pace of this game. I think Vanderbilt's going to have to assert the pace of the game. They're going to have to play faster, because if St. Mary's gets its way, this is going to look a lot like that Drake game where Vanderbilt's going to have no margin for error. where it's not going to be able to turn it over
Yeah.
at all, where it's going to have to score every time down the floor because it's not going to be able to get offensive rebounds. That's what I'm looking at here, because St. Mary's, I think, really makes you play with your left hand in a lot of ways. They're one of the best defensive rebounding teams in the country. They don't really ever turn it over. They're top 50 in the country in turnover rate. They're old. At least their go-to guys are old. And I think there is more size on this roster than you'd initially think, even if the athleticism of that size isn't great. So Vanderbilt's going to have to get out and run. It's going to have to make Mitchell Saxon guard on the perimeter. And I think the thing that I'm looking at is, like, can Devin McLaughlin and Jalen Carey stay out of foul trouble? I don't think any of St. Mary's bigs are guys who can really assert their dominance and take over the game as scorers. I think they can be guys who can rebound and guys who can make the next pass and keep it going. Maybe they'll score 10 or 15 points, but they don't seem to me like guys who are going to completely take over the game and get Jalen Carey in foul trouble early and get Devin McLaughlin in foul trouble early. I think Devin McLaughlin is a key player here. He's a guy who St. Mary's would have to completely adjust its defense if he was on the floor. And I think that's one matchup to watch. But Billy, I'm going to swing it back to you before we go to Brandon. It just seems to me like if this game is up and down and Vanderbilt's able to get in transition, it's going to be a completely different game than if it has to walk the ball up the court every time. And I think a lot of that has to do with defense as well. Like, if St. Mary's can't get its defense set, it's because it didn't score. Every time St. Mary's scores is a possession where Vanderbilt has to go in the half court. So it starts on defense, but Billy, they've got to get in transition and they've got to be able to play to their identity a little bit.
You've got to force St. Mary's to play your style, essentially. You've got to speed this game up, but not. There's a fine line there. You cannot be hectic with it, because they will force some turnovers. If you're loose with it, they'll take advantage of pretty much all your mistakes. It's a good team, guys. It's a really good team that Vanderbilt's matched up with. Saxon, they're old guys. They've been there forever. And we do have Brandon Bigsby here with us. Brandon, basically, we are taking a deeper look at this game with St. Mary's. Joey and I hinted at it a little bit on Sunday night, and you provided, so you're basically our producer that night, providing us with stats left and right. But Brandon, I want to get your initial take on the matchup and anything else you've learned along the way. We talked about the scouting report that one of the Belmont GAs, Bryce Haas, put out of St. Mary's, which was about 20 minutes long. Ended up watching that. I went back to watch the game with Gonzaga. What else have you been able to glean about this team, and maybe do you feel better or worse about it now that we've gotten a little bit deeper into the week?
First of all, my apologies for being late, but Billy, something that you just said that I really agree with when I was kind of just looking through everything about the St. Mary's team. I had watched them a couple of times throughout the year before we knew about them in Selection Sunday, but I think the number one thing that is going to be really, really key for Vanderbilt is that they're going to have to try to impose their style of play on this game. These two teams could not really be any more different from each other. And it's interesting. I was doing some stat digging last night, and the number one thing that stood out to me is that St. Mary's, while Vanderbilt loves to have that fast-paced, high-tempo game, they want to have as many possessions as possible, St. Mary's is the complete opposite. They're ranked 359th in the country in adjusted tempo per game, 40 possessions on KenPom, while Vanderbilt is 64th. So if Vanderbilt, I feel like, can force St. Mary's to have to run up and down the floor a ton, I think that really does give Vanderbilt a little bit of an advantage. And I'll be honest with you, when I saw St. Mary's, that matchup pop up on Selection Sunday with Vanderbilt, I didn't necessarily feel as great about it, but the more I kind of looked into St. Mary's, the more I kind of, just thought about it looking at this Vanderbilt team, I actually think that the SEC has prepared Vanderbilt really well for a matchup like this. St. Mary's has a ton of size, a ton of bigs. They rebound the ball better than arguably any team in the country. But I do think that Vanderbilt is a little bit more athletic than St. Mary's is, and I really do think that they have played teams a little bit more talented than St. Mary's is, and they've played a team that can rebound just as well as St. Mary's can. So I don't think this game is going to be easy, as Joey alluded to. I think that Jalen Carey and Devin McLaughlin are probably the two X factors of this game. They're going to have to be able to play physically without getting those fouls that are avoidable in this game. They're really going to need that against a St. Mary's team that has multiple guys inside, like Saxon, like others that are 7 foot plus, they can grab those rebounds and give St. Mary's extra possessions and maybe frustrate Vanderbilt a little bit. But I actually do feel a little bit better about this matchup today than what I did a little bit over 48 hours ago.
Yeah, I do too. I went back and watched the Gonzaga game, and I noticed that Gonzaga had a plan and made a point to attack their bigs, to run up and down the floor. Graham Ike is not as athletic as a McLaughlin or even a Carey, but he was. It looked like he tired Saxon out throughout that game, and they attacked them on the glass. They were just really aggressive with them. And also, guys, Saxon is a load, as we like to say, Joey. I mean, he's not a guy that's really going to shoot many 15-foot jumpers, but if he gets it in the paint, good luck, because he's got great footwork and he's going to finish the majority of the time. Marciulionis, quietly the WCC Player of the Year, just so steady, and watching him on those pick and rolls with him and Saxon is lethal. I mean, that is hard to guard. It's rare that Marciulionis turns the ball over, but somebody mentioned this on I think it was one of the Field of 68 podcasts. It might have actually been Oglesby, Joey. He said, I can't wait to watch that Hogard Marciulionis matchup, because number one, they're physical. They don't score. Like, I could see both of them, having 12 points, 6 assists, not really, doing it all for their team, but being on the court for a lot of the game. And that's going to be a really fun, interesting matchup. But St. Mary's also has a guy, Jordan Ross, who is kind of their slasher. He'll hit some threes. Mikey Lewis was the WCC Freshman of the Year, who is another really good shooter. They don't shoot it at an elite level, though, and they don't shoot it a ton, but they get a ton of catch-and-shoot threes, which is what Bryce pointed out in his video, how their offense can be so crisp at times that the ball doesn't touch the ground. On some of those possessions. Vandy, like you said, Brandon, is going to have to use their athletic advantage. If they don't, I struggle to see them winning this game. That's their advantage, getting up and down the floor. And Joey, if they're not able to do that, I don't see them being able to play St. Mary's style and win this game.
For sure. I think Saxon is an interesting case study here. I think he's kind of a microcosm of what St. Mary's is. He's smart. He can pass it, often makes the right play. He's physical, doesn't really make mistakes. But also you can exploit him in a ball screen coverage once in a while. And I think Vanderbilt's really going to look to do that. It's going to look to have A.J. Hogard go downhill and go into Saxon, or it's going to look to throw an alley-oop to Jalen Carey, something along those lines. Maybe if McLaughlin pops, it's going to be hard for Saxon to get out there and defend him off the closeout. That's what I look at as the microcosm of their front court. They do have guys who can get out there and guard, but I'm going to guess Saxon probably isn't going to run around and chase McLaughlin the entire game. He's probably going to have to drop once in a while, or most of the time for that matter. I'm thinking that's a matchup that they could maybe exploit a little bit. Also want to mention, see that their names are tough to pronounce, Billy. I admire you here. Paulus Murakowskis. He's a guy I've watched a lot over the last couple of days. I think that's going to be the Chris Monyon matchup. Man, he is talented. He's 6'8", sophomore. Can put it on the floor, can post smaller guys. Man, he's good. And that guy could be a future WCC star. He's only a sophomore, had a rough WCC title game against Gonzaga. But man, he could be a player that changes the dynamic of this game. He's obviously 6'8", got an NBA type build, can put it on the floor, can get his own shot. He's athletic, he can guard multiple positions. I think that's the guy on St. Mary's that I'm really interested to see in person, just because he's such a different player than you would expect a team like St. Mary's to have, just with the raw ability he has. You generally think of their guys as maybe under-recruited, under-athletic guys that come together and make a team. But, man, that's a guy who I could see being a Power 5 player at some point down the line here. And even if he doesn't go to be a Power 5 player, he could be an all-WCC guy every year for the rest of his career with the skill set that he has. And I think that's a guy that could really get loose if Chris Monyon doesn't do well on him. And I look at St. Mary's guards as well. I think it's a good point mentioning they don't turn it over a lot. Those guys can really manipulate the game, kind of like Hogard can. And I think even some of them have been more productive scorers than Hogard has throughout the year, especially their older guys. I think Ross and Lewis aren't guys who I have my eye on as guys who are going to navigate the pick and roll and just pick Vanderbilt apart. But obviously, their older guys are going to manipulate the game, kind of like Tommy Kuzi did for them a few years ago. Just those are guys that I look at and say, man, Vanderbilt is not going to have an easy time forcing them into mistakes. And we talked about the athleticism too. I don't know that I fully buy that Vandy's athleticism is going to kill St. Mary's. And we do know that they have an athletic advantage. That's not to take away from anything anybody else has said, but St. Mary's beat Nebraska 77-74. Lewis had 23 points in that game. St. Mary's only turned it over 9 times against Nebraska, who honestly, in my mind, is probably a more athletic team than Vanderbilt is. They scored 64 points against Arizona State, turned it over 13 times, so still not a super high number. St. Mary's is going to get their way a lot of the time when they play against a team that wants to get up and down a little bit more. We have to see if Vanderbilt can become the exception, because you look at a game like Gonzaga, they beat Gonzaga twice. Gonzaga is more athletic than Vanderbilt is. So Vanderbilt is not going to live and die off athleticism in this game, Brandon. It's going to have to be sharp, and Mark Byington has said it a lot about a lot of different teams throughout the year. They make you pay for every mistake you make. St. Mary's certainly fits that category.
Yeah, and Joey, you mentioned that Gonzaga game. They did beat Gonzaga twice, and really the difference in that WCC title game was the turnovers. In the first 2 meetings, Gonzaga turned it over just 11 times in the first game, only turned it over 11 times in the second game. In WCC title game, they turned it over 18 times. Gonzaga turned it into 20 points off of turnovers, and they only scored 58 points in total. So really, the turnovers were the massive difference there. Not only that, but St. Mary's actually didn't hit a single 3 in that game as well. They went 0 for 16 from the perimeter.
Of course.
So it was a very uncharacteristic St. Mary's-like game. And if the Gales win that game, they're probably not even playing Vanderbilt. They probably are at around the 5 or 6 seed line realistically. But I do think the thing, too, with St. Mary's that is going to be very interesting, and we talk about Vanderbilt being athletic, and a lot of times people think about the defense and the reboundings and being able to drive inside, but kind of focusing on that part that you said, Joey. The thing about St. Mary's, what makes them so good on the glass, despite not being maybe one of the most athletic teams that Vanderbilt is going to see, is that they are very smart with how they rebound. They strategically rebound by utilizing a lot of tips. They use that size and have guys go in for tips and have the others positioned to try to grab that tip because they know it's going to be coming. And that's something that Vanderbilt is going to have to be ready for. There's been a lot of times we've seen this season where Vanderbilt will position themselves for rebounds but won't fully commit to going up and grabbing with 2 hands and boxing out. The little fundamentals that you get taught in middle school and AAU, that is going to be really, really important against the St. Mary's team, because what they don't have in athleticism, what they don't have in perimeter shooting, they have in just little fundamental aspects of the game. That's why they're able to rebound so well. That's why they limit turnovers so much. Although Vanderbilt also is a team that does not turn the ball over a whole lot, so I do think that does help them out a little bit as well. It's just really interesting how a lot of the strengths that Vanderbilt has, St. Mary's kind of has some of those counters on the other end where they're either just as good or arguably a little bit better. So this is not going to be an easy game for Vanderbilt to win. St. Mary's, they only lost 5 games this year for a reason, and they only lost no game they lost by more than 7. So it's going to be a tough game for Vanderbilt to win, but I do feel a little bit better, I feel like, about their chances of potentially doing so than what I did say maybe 24 to 48 hours ago for sure.
I think those are great points, Brandon. Another observation that I have in kind of studying St. Mary's, first off, they'll be motivated. Last year, they lost to Grand Canyon in the opening round. They've got old guys that a lot of these guys played on that team last year. They're not really going to be, oh, wow, look at this, this big arena. This is March Madness. You might have some of that with Vanderbilt. Now, I don't know how long it lasts, and maybe Byington takes that out of them, and maybe they don't. Maybe they come out here and they're fearless, but it's human nature that you only have 2 guys that have played an NCAA tournament game. That is an advantage, I think, for St. Mary's, and not to mention Bennett, I think, has won 6 NCAA tournament games. Great coach. We do have a question we'll get to later from Justin of comparing the coaching. But a question I have, does St. Mary's have anybody that can stay with Jason Edwards? Maybe that's Jordan Ross. Maybe they put I'm getting these names. Marshallonis. Maybe they put Marshallonis on him for a little bit. I don't think there's one guy you look at and say, hey, and this is a case for a lot of SEC teams even. Like, I don't know if we have a guy that can stick with Edwards, but Edwards to me, guys, is if you get your classic 17-18 from him, you'll be fine. Now, again, I'm not saying that's the case. If you get 18, they win. But I think it could be. I think if Edwards is himself, doesn't turn the ball over, doesn't take bad shots, and hits what was he in the SEC tournament against Texas, guys?
6 for 13, 2 for 4 from 3.
2 for 4 from 3. Okay, so only got 4 threes off. You're going to need more than just 4 3 attempts here from Edwards, and more than just 6 of 13 from the field. But Joey, to me, he's got to get going. And if they don't get it, I just think it's going to be hard because St. Mary's knows that's what Vandy's going to try to get Edwards going. St. Mary's knows that because if Vanderbilt doesn't, you force a guy like McLaughlin to hold up his end of the bargain. And in a lot of games, he's in foul trouble. Then you force Hogard to force things, and that's not always a great ending to that. You force Nickel and Collins to do more things. You force Huffman. If you get it from Edwards, everybody else is more comfortable. So, Joey, I'm not breaking any news here, but I think in this game in particular, you've got to have it. I don't think you can afford just 6 for 20 showing from Jason Edwards.
Yeah, I mean, he's the guy, and at this time of year, your guys have to play like guys. Jason Edwards has to be Jason Edwards. Tyler Nickel has to do what Tyler Nickel did against Ole Miss, against Texas A&M, against Mizzou. Look, 3 for 6 from 3 against Ole Miss, 7 for 10 against A&M, 3 for 6 against Mizzou, and then 4 for 7 against Arkansas. They scored 77 that game, so I think that was a big reason why. But SEC tournament, 1 for 7. The game before the 3-game winning streak against Ole Miss, A&M, and Mizzou, 1 for 5, 3 for 5, 1 for 5. Those were 3 straight losses. The correlation's pretty clear with Tyler Nickel. If he's making shots, they're a different team as well. And I think Jalen Carey's got to get back to being Jalen Carey. He is probably their most Power 5-esque body. And I do think this is a weird matchup because I think a lot of people would assume St. Mary's is going to go, oh, big bad Power 5, let's turn it over a few times. But I think Vanderbilt is one of the less athletic Power 5 teams that is in the field, and I think that probably helps St. Mary's a little bit. But when you consider all these data points and everything that we've discussed about how good St. Mary's is, I think we leave out that Vanderbilt has the most dynamic player on the floor in Jason Edwards, and I don't think it's even really close. I mean, that guy is going to be $1 million player next year, regardless of whether that's at Vanderbilt or somewhere else. There's nobody on St. Mary's roster who's worthy of being $1 million player. There's some really good players. There's WCC Player of the Year. It's a guy that I'm saying could be an all WCC guy the rest of his career if he wants to be. But nobody on that floor is as talented as Jason Edwards is. And Vanderbilt's got to have Jason Edwards be Jason Edwards. And that's why we've covered Jason Edwards the way we have this year, because we know that he makes this team tick, right? If he's making shots, they are a completely different team than when he has 2 points against Arkansas or 0 against Mississippi State. We've covered Jason Edwards more harshly than other guys on this roster, I think, because we know that he's the best player on almost every floor he steps on, right? Excluding the Alabama game with Mark Sears or Auburn with Janai Broom. There's not a lot of games that Jason Edwards hasn't been the most talented guy on the floor in, and it's time for him to show up on the big stage, Brandon.
Yeah, and, you talk about Jason Edwards. He's somebody that, I made a piece, I think it was in like late January, early February, and said if Vanderbilt can make a run, he has the makeup of somebody that can kind of become one of those March Madness darlings. There is a lot of Carson Edwards, I feel like, to his game, and I think that he's someone that is going to have to step up and give Vanderbilt that 18 to 20-plus points they need. And Billy, you compared this to the Drake game on Sunday night, and I feel like there are a lot of similarities in the matchups, and not necessarily in terms of the way St. Mary's roster is built, but in the way that the two teams are very different from each other stylistically. And if you go back to that game in November, Jason Edwards had 26 points against Drake in 26 minutes. He had the 5 turnovers, but he was 7 for 13 from the field, 2 for 5 from 3. 10 for 11 from the free throw line. He was far and away Vanderbilt's best player. He was the only reason they were really close in that game. There were three guys at 9 outside of him. A.J. Hoggard, who was 4 for 12, M.J. Collins and Chris Magnon both had 9 off the bench. But this feels like a matchup to where Jason Edwards has that ability to where he can go in and get his. And, something that you also mentioned, Billy, that I do think is a good point. St. Mary's having that experience, being in this moment plenty of times before, that is an advantage for them. Randy Bennett, 6-10 in the NCAA tournament. He's been here plenty of times. He knows what it takes to win. Maybe not the most glowing record in the world for a head coach this time of year, but it still says something that he's been able to make the NCAA tournament for 12 seasons now. He's been able to win there 6 times. I think that A.J. Hoggard is going to be a really, really important piece for Vanderbilt in this game. Maybe not just because of him being one of the point guards on this team and being the floor general, but this is what they brought A.J. Hoggard in for. A.J. Hoggard has played 8 tournament games in his career. He started 7 of them. He's averaged just under 12 points per game in those games, just under 5 assists. He shot around 45% from the field. If you compare that to how he is in his entire career, he shot 40% from the field. Historically, A.J. Hoggard has played very well in this tournament for a Michigan State team that made a Sweet 16 run with him as their starting point guard. They need him to be the veteran leader that they brought him in here to be. It feels like this is his opportunity to do that. So I want to make sure to kind of say that as well, because Hoggard, outside of the little bit that Jalen Carey played last year and the lone game that Grant Huffman played with Davidson, he is the only player on this floor that is used to playing at this stage and used to playing at that level of competition against a team that is very seasoned on that March Madness stage. So I think A.J. Hoggard is somebody that's going to really be important for his Vanderbilt team to lean on. Maybe not just in terms of the point production and the assists and being the facilitator, but just relying on his experience being in this moment plenty of times in his career as well.
Guys, Randy Bennett, I didn't realize this. He's been at St. Mary's since 2002, which is a long time. He made his first tournament appearance in 2005. They lost in the first round. But like you said, Brandon, he's been to the tournament a lot. I mean, his system, he's probably been running this type of, he's probably morphed it, into a modern style. But I mean, he's well respected around the country. But he hasn't made a Sweet 16 since 2010. So keep that in mind that, again, they could beat Vanderbilt, but just keep in mind that they've made tournaments, but in 2012, lost in the second round. 2013, lost in the second round. 2017, lost in the second round. 2019, lost in the first round. In 2022, lost in the second round. 2023, lost in the second round. Last year, lost in the first round. So a lot of these years, they'll get that first win, but they can't get over the hump to get to the Sweet 16. Just want to remind you guys of that. I do have a question for you guys that I want to save for later and just get this churning in your brain a little bit. How possible is a Sweet 16 run? So keep that in mind, guys. But we do have some comments and questions to get to. Justin, can you compare the coaching? Mark Byington in his second tournament appearance, Randy Bennett, and I don't even know what, 17th? He's 6-10, so 17th tournament appearance for Randy Bennett. I give Bennett the edge. But yeah, it's hard not to give Bennett the edge, basically. But Byington is still a really good coach. It's nothing against him. It's just, number one, Bennett has experience. He has experience with his guys, with this team. They have continuity. And I think Vanderbilt wins the game, but that doesn't mean I think Byington's the better coach. But it's also not a long shot. You can compare the coaching. It's not, it's like Joe Bennett's not, night and day better, but the production is just there. I mean, it's, he's the 17th tournament game. I give the coaching edge to Bennett.
Yeah. I mean, Randy Bennett, not Tony Bennett, is one of college basketball's more underrated coaches. He's turned that thing into a buzzsaw in the WCC, and that's not normal, right? Like, they've beaten Power Fives dang near every year of his tenure. It feels like they've been competitive for the league championship dang near every year of his tenure, it feels like. He is one of the hidden gems in college basketball's coaching ranks, and Mark Byington's the rising star. He's going to run into a grueling old vet in Randy Bennett, who knows what his team wants to do. He's got his point guard joined at the hip with him. It feels like kind of the epitome of a veteran coach versus a first-year head coach at a place where Byington at times has had guys doing things that are uncharacteristic, whereas Bennett's kind of just got a machine rolling there with a bunch of guys who he recruited exactly to fit to his system, who all know what they're doing and how they're going to do it at all times. Feels like they rarely ever make mistakes, although the Gonzaga game indicates that they can. I don't think it means that Randy Bennett's a significantly better coach than Byington, but I think that team, at least this year in a vacuum, has been better coached because the system has been in place for so long and he knows what he's getting himself into with guys. Byington has obviously had to toy with a ton of different lineups. He's had to kind of just let some of his guys be guys. And I don't know that Bennett's philosophy would work as well in the SEC as it does at that level, because it's probably hard to get SEC guys to buy into that system. But I just view St. Mary's, Brandon, as a more disciplined team that does a lot of things well. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are a better team or that they're better coached than Vanderbilt is, though. I think that's just kind of the difference in the situations of the programs at this stage.
Yeah, I all agree with that. And, I'm glad we're giving St. Mary's the respect that they deserve, because they, in terms of consistent winning programs in the country, I feel like a lot of times St. Mary's is kind of one of those programs that's just been, kind of the little brother to Gonzaga in a lot of ways, just because those are the two programs that have dominated the WCC. And I mean, after this year, you have to remember, it will just be St. Mary's in the WCC. Gonzaga moving over to the Pac-12 after the season, so they'll be kind of running that thing on their own. But I do have to agree with you on that, Joey. I don't really think it's that, one coach is significantly better than the other. I think we've seen that Mark Byington is a darn good basketball coach. I think we've seen that in terms of the X's and O's, in terms of the rotations, in terms of him being able to get this team of guys that were brought together to buy in and make that all gel in a really short amount of time and turning it into success. I think really the biggest difference, again, is going to be which team is going to be able to impose their play style on the other. Is St. Mary's going to be able to slow this game down and kind of frustrate Vanderbilt and get them to force some things? I think that kind of had a bit to do with those last three losses. I think that a lot of these teams were able to slow Vanderbilt's offense down, kind of impose their will on them at the perimeter, not give them a lot of that open space to run around and do these cuts and get these open shots with guys like Edwards and Collins and Hogard. And then they were able to go in and capitalize on the other end. St. Mary's is one of those teams where, if you're a boxing guy or a martial arts guy, they will beat you into submission. That is what St. Mary's likes to do, while Vanderbilt wants to knock you out in the first or second round and make this thing as short as possible. I think that that's going to be the difference between the two coaches. I don't really think it's that, Randy Bennett's a better coach than Mark Byington or vice versa. It's just a difference in style, and it's going to be a matter of who can execute their style on the other and kind of make the other side more uncomfortable and get them out of their rhythm.
Bill, this guy's good. This guy has all the analogies in the world.
I love it. I love having Brandon on. That's why we got him.
Right? We need to keep him for a long time.
We need to lock him up. Justin, if they go man out of the blocks, what are the matchups? It'll be Marciulionis on Hogard, you would guess. Edwards on Ross, right? They've got a guy at small forward that we haven't talked about, Luke Barrett, who's 6'6", senior, good player. Barrett and Magnon, unless they have Morauskas at the 3. But a lot of times they'll have Morauskas at the 4 and Saxon at the 5. So Barrett at the 3 with Magnon on him, you would guess. Morauskas and Nickel. Actually, switch that. You would probably switch that. Nickel on Ross at that point, and then Morauskas and Magnon guarding each other, and then Saxon and McLaughlin. And if that's your starting 5, that's been your starting 5 the last few weeks here. I don't know if you guys disagree with any of those, but Edwards on Ross would slightly concern me, but that's not new that you're slightly concerned about who Edwards is guarding.
Yeah, I think the thing that stands out to me when you read that off, St. Mary's has positional size out the wazoo. Like it's maybe not that even that they have Saxon, because I think Saxon would be like an average SEC big size wise. It's just you look at the four.
Marauskas at 6'8".
Whereas 6'8" with it has to be a 7-foot wingspan. Watching him play, like the shot release has to be a 7-foot wingspan or close to it. 6'6" small forward, Nichols 6'7", Magnon around that same place, 6'5", 6'6". So they have SEC size, and I think we've got to hammer in the point of like to St. Mary's, this is not big bad Power 5. Like this is a group that they think they can beat because they match up decently well with them size wise. It's not like these guys are coming in and they're playing against Lipscomb, who has a 6'8" center a lot of the years, right? This is a team that has Power 5 size. They've got guys who maybe were under recruited, but some of them have Power 5 ability. I don't think this is any team where you're looking at it and saying, wow, there's a huge mismatch here because they have a center that's way bigger than St. Mary's, or St. Mary's has a big drop off after their 5-man in terms of size. I mean, they've got depth in the front court, and Brandon, I think Vandy's going to have to be ready to go, and they're going to have to. I don't think this is a team that's going to overwhelm you with size or athleticism. Their steal and block numbers are going to indicate that they're not even close to overwhelming in that sense. But Vandy's got to be ready to play, and it's got to be cognizant of the fact that they're going to play a team with some size as well.
Yeah, and again, I do think that this is a matchup to where Vanderbilt playing in the SEC, that does kind of help prepare them a little bit for that. Although, like you said, St. Mary's, this isn't just your typical mid-major that they're playing. This is one of the high-end mid-majors that is a mid-major because they're a small school and a small conference, but they aren't really a mid-major in terms of their quality and what they're able to do and them being used to this competition level. They are not scared of the SEC. They're not scared of the Big 12, the ACC. Any of these teams that they're going to play, they're not scared of. But there is one person that I feel like that we have not mentioned on the Vanderbilt side. And Billy, you mentioned, Ross maybe having the matchup against Jason Edwards. This feels like a game where Vanderbilt is going to be very glad to have MJ Collins on this team. Yep. And MJ Collins is somebody that I know we don't necessarily talk about a whole lot just because, you bring a lot of attention to the Jason Edwards and the AJ Hogards and the McLaughlins and the Magnons. But MJ Collins is far and away not only one of Vanderbilt's better defenders, he's one of the more athletic guys on this team too. And it feels like having MJ Collins back, potentially a lot more healthy than what he was this time a week ago at Bridgestone Arena, to have him match up against some of these guards of St. Mary's. Now, I don't know how he's going to match up against a guy like Marciunas, who is 6'8" and has a lot of that depth and a lot of that length, but it feels like having him back and having Grant Huffman back as well to kind of come in, be pieces off the bench, to play good defense, and not necessarily hide Jason Edwards. I don't think Jason Edwards is a horrible defender, but you probably don't want Jason Edwards against the best matchup on the floor. I think that's going to be a very, very big piece of this Vanderbilt team. We've heard Mark Byington kind of say it. Vanderbilt's best asset is strength in numbers, especially at that guard spot. They've been kind of without that the last week or two, with Huffman being out with injury, with MJ Collins being banged up. You get those guys back healthy. I think that's a really, really significant part to this that Vanderbilt is going to be very, very grateful to have back against the St. Mary's team that, like you said, Joey, may only play 7 or 8 guys, but all of those guys are very versatile. They have multiple guys that can do it, even though they might not necessarily deploy a 10-man lineup night in, night out. They only played 7 against Gonzaga, but all 7 of those guys are just so versatile in what they're able to do, and all of them have that ability to kind of rotate and play in different roles. And it's a tough matchup for Vanderbilt, but I do think that having those 2 guys off the bench, especially MJ Collins, look for them to step up. I think MJ Collins might be one of the more important players on this Vanderbilt team that not a lot of people talk about.
Billy, can I give a MJ Collins note real quick?
Sure.
So you remember the pressers on Sunday, AJ Hogard said he was worried about the tournament. I think McLaughlin and Edwards said the same thing as they were walking into the room for the selection show. Yeah, I was walking into the facility for the selection show. I see MJ Collins, who, by the way, I need to see him on the live shows. He said the last time he was on was the Will Purdue show. I mean, what is this guy busy or something? Where is he? But so I walk in and I see him get out of his car. I go, MJ, you nervous? He goes, hell no. And he walks in. I mean, that guy's a freaking bulldog. They need that guy on the floor. And I think he's a huge piece to this, like Brandon said, Billy.
Absolutely. I think Huffman is as well. And you could tell how excited Byington is to get him back. That's his guy. Like, he would go to war for Grant Huffman. There's a reason he brought him in. And I think a big part of that was, if you make the tournament, there's not a ton of drop off in terms of taking care of the ball and defensively behind Hogard. If Hogard gets a couple early fouls, I know there's some people in the chat already laughing, but I think you look at this and you go, okay, if Hogard gets a couple of fouls, you don't worry about Huffman on Marcellonis, really. Like, if Marcellonis was, Wade Taylor, I would say maybe, but Marcellonis is a similar type player to Huffman. And so I think that's also something to remember as well, that you have Huffman back, and you mentioned Collins. That's a great comment from Collins, by the way. Okay. One more question. And again, if you guys have any comments, questions, feel free to fire away. We're going to try to wrap it up here with a final one. How possible is a Sweet 16 run? Vanderbilt would face most likely Alabama. I was joking with some people yesterday. How funny would it be if Robert Morris knocked off Alabama and and Vanderbilt got lucky there? Doubt that happens. Robert Morris, I don't think, has been in the tournament in a while. Second time around, Joey, quickly here, could that matchup be different if Vanderbilt beats St. Mary's?
It could. I think there's two high variance teams, and if Vanderbilt gets through the first game, it's going to be a much different game, a much more free-flowing game, and maybe that could unlock Vanderbilt a little bit. I think it's going to have to bring it both games if it's going to go to the Sweet 16, but it's going to have to do it in different ways. It's just going to have to withstand a bunch of punches in the first game in terms of rebounding, in terms of how St. Mary's wants to control the pace, and then you're going to see the complete opposite of St. Mary's in round two. If you win, you're going to see a team that's going to get up and down. They're going to have size all over the floor. They're going to have guys who can switch and guard out on the perimeter. Man, this is a team that I think is the antithesis of Vanderbilt, or the antithesis of St. Mary's. And Vanderbilt's going to have to be ready to play both styles. It's going to be a difficult first two games, but I don't think you count this team out of doing anything after what we said. Well, not what we said, Brandon. I remember we were not saying they were going to finish 16th in the preseason poll. You can go back and find my preseason poll. I didn't vote them 16th, but everybody else seemed to do that. But Brandon, they've overcome the odds all year. Maybe not my odds. I think I had them 11th and they finished 12th. So look at that. But they seem to have a knack for winning games that they're not supposed to win, and doing it when nobody thinks that they're capable of winning a game. When everyone seems to think this team is dead in the water and out of it, they find a way to surprise you. So I'm not counting them out from going to a Sweet 16, although it's going to be their most difficult test yet to beat those two styles in 4 days.
Yeah, that's a big ask. And, I know a lot of people look at the first time these two teams met and say, oh, well, Alabama beat Vanderbilt by 16. The final score was 103-87. Vanderbilt was down 17 in the first half. They outscored Alabama in that second half, 56-55. So they figured something out. Alabama got big days from Mohamed Diabate and Aiden Holloway. Those were both of their best games of the season, far and away, I would say. I think that, though I probably wouldn't pick Vanderbilt to beat Alabama, quite honestly, I wouldn't put it past them being able to do so. I think Vanderbilt has kind of learned themselves a little bit more. I also don't necessarily think that Alabama is playing at the same consistent level that they were playing the last time Vanderbilt saw them. So it's a big ask to go from beating St. Mary's to beating Alabama in 2 or 3 days. But at the same time, as Willie just said, that's a team that Vanderbilt has played before. It's a little bit easier to prepare for them compared to having to prepare for maybe a Duke or a St. John's on the other side that you haven't played yet. So I do think that does kind of help you a little bit. Also, as you mentioned, Joey, it is a very similar style that Alabama plays to what Vanderbilt already plays themselves. I think Alabama is kind of, the high-end version and what Vanderbilt kind of wants to be at some point. down the line, you're kind of seeing what you hope the future version of yourselves are in a sense. And it's not like you have to travel. You're going to be in the same Cleveland, Ohio, the same Rocket Arena, regardless of what you're going against. So I don't know if I would necessarily pick Vanderbilt to beat Alabama if they do match up, but I wouldn't be surprised to necessarily see them do it either. I'm not doubting this team for anything. No one thought they'd beat Tennessee. No one thought they'd beat Kentucky. No one thought they would go to Texas A&M in College Station and beat them on the road. This team continues to defy the odds. I think that they are at their best when they're in that underdog role, and then it's them against everyone else. I wouldn't be shocked. And by the way, I do have one quick note that I want to mention. It might be slightly off topic, but we talked about Grant Huffman making the tournament one game with Davidson. Guess who he played against? A.J. Hoggard, Michigan State. So they played each other in the tournament before. I'm not sure if they remember that. It was all the way back in 2021, but I've been saving that note for like about a month now, and I wanted to make sure to use it because those two have played against each other before in the tournament. Huffman played 22 minutes. Hoggard played exactly 22 minutes as well. Michigan State beat Davidson 74-73. So just thought that was kind of fun. I'm not sure if they remember playing each other, but they have played against each other in the tournament. And that was Grant Huffman's lone NCAA tournament experience prior to this season.
That's awesome. So Huffman, Hoggard, and Carey. Those are the three guys that have played in the tournament.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So there
and
you
Alex
go.
Hemingway.
And Alex Hemingway. Yes, we cannot forget.
Holman Smith was in the
Holman Smith as well. Yeah, absolutely. Can't forget about those guys. Mm-hmm. Okay, guys, that was awesome. Good scouting report. Again, it's Vanderbilt and St. Mary's Friday at 2:15 p.m. Central, 3:15 Eastern. Joey will be up there. We'll have coverage all day. We'll probably try to get on here one more time, maybe two before the game. But we'll definitely have something game day that morning with Joey, probably outside the arena, and then Brandon, stay locked in with us. We'll get you back on here. But guys, I really appreciate it. Man, this should be fun.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Billy. We'll talk soon.
All right, that's Joey Dwyer, Brandon Bigsby doing a great job covering Vanderbilt basketball right here at Vandy247. Keep up with their coverage throughout the week. They'll have pieces, and then of course game day with the board and Twitter and everything. Really, really good stuff. All right, to wrap it up here, long episode. Apologies there, but I did want to get our Real Deal podcast segment out here. The last 10, 11 minutes of the show. Real quick, Philip asks, anyone else going to Cleveland? Would love to meet up with some doors. Well, if you are going to Cleveland, don't forget to book your stay with doorsaway.com. That benefits Vanderbilt's NIL Collective Anchor Impact, and I talk about that with Paul Grindstaff, the general manager of Anchor Impact. We also talk about the matching gift from Mark Carter, which was massive. If you guys are confused about that, he clears that up. So let's get to our interview with Paul Grindstaff. Paul, it's been a little bit since we last talked. We're glad we're able to hop on here and talk a little NIL, little Anchor Impact. This basketball success, man. The men get a 10 seed. They'll be playing 7 seed St. Mary's on Friday in Cleveland. The women get a 7 seed, so the other side of the dial. They'll be matched up with Oregon. They're in Duke's regional. How about this basketball success? I know there was a ton of work put in to these programs, to the rosters prior to the season. It's got to feel good for you guys and to accomplish these bursts. I know the women made it last year, but to throw the men in there now this year, that's got to be fun.
Well, Billy, first of all, thanks for having me back on. And, this is the outcome that we set out to achieve. Matter of fact, right now, roster and strategy and things like that for next season are being talked about. But, when you talk about retaining players, recruiting players, giving them an opportunity and changing the way we go about doing things at Vanderbilt where we expect success, what a year we've had when you talk about football, when you talk about men's, women's basketball, when you talk about soccer, taking down number 1, getting to the Sweet 16. And then I think everyone saw today that Candace was named one of the NACDA athletic directors of the year. it's a good time to be a Commodore.
Absolutely. And yeah, you mentioned the football success, and I love asking players, the carryover factor. Talking to Coach Byington about the football win over Virginia Tech, and how players said that they were at the Alabama game, but you turn it over to basketball. They knock off Kentucky at home, knock off Tennessee, have some other big wins. I'm a believer that momentum carries over. And of course, we've seen it a little bit with baseball here. You mentioned soccer, and of course on the women's side, you got to believe that the carryover factor is real there, that you have a historic football season. Well, now the basketball teams are sitting here saying, hey, let's go do the same thing.
Well, and you touched on something there. It's one thing to do something once in a while and maybe come across and luck into something. Well, football beat Alabama. And then what they do? They went out and won other big games. Started it off beating Virginia Tech. There's an old saying that offensive coordinators talk about, and that is when you ask the starting quarterback after the game about the pick six, and the quarterback has to ask which one, that's a bad thing. But in our case, when you talk about a big win, a program-defining moment, it's which one. You mentioned, beat Kentucky. Well, you beat Tennessee. And then what happened? Well, the women beat Tennessee. And then what they do? They beat Tennessee again. And so taking that quarterback analogy to the other end of the spectrum, when you ask your star women's player about her 50-point game, then you have to say, well, which one? It's not just a one-off thing. You do it, and then you do it again. You keep coming back to the well. And again, the way we do that is have an expectation of success. And that starts with fans in the stands, season ticket holders, being loud, contributing to Vandy United, being members of the National Commodore Club, and contributing to NIL. That's the three pillars of success, and that's what's taken place.
Well, you mentioned NIL, and you guys received a huge transformative gift that will match all gifts to Anchor Impact in support of men's basketball NIL up to $1.5 million. Mark H. Carter there with the big lift. And I want to ask you, because I've had people ask me, well, what does this mean? I want to give you the floor to kind of lay out what exactly that means, how important that is, because I think some people might be surprised by what that donation and that support actually means for the men's basketball program.
Sure. And let's start out by saying, what a hero, what a champion Mark H. Carter is. Folks that come to games will remember a few weeks ago, he was recognized for endowing the head basketball coaching position. So Mark is now the head basketball coach. He is the Mark H. Carter endowed head basketball coach at Vanderbilt University. So he stepped forward with that. And then there's a conversation between the two Marks, Mr. Carter and Coach Byington. And Mr. Carter asked Coach Byington, what is it you need? What can I best do to help you? And Coach was up front and said, you know what? We need to be players in the NIL, and we need to be in the top third of the SEC. So we did some research, market research, and that's part of my job, is to make sure we know what our competitors are playing with. And Mr. Carter said, okay, here's what we'll do. We'll do $1.5 million, but I want another $1.5 million. So every dollar up to $1.5 million, I'll match. And at the end of the day, the objective is we have another $3 million in our war chest to go hunt with, to recruit and retain. And with that, plus with the revenue share, that's going to put us in a really good position. Now, as a fan base, as a collective, we got to do our share, do our parts, right? And we've had scores of new donors since that campaign went live. It's on our website, and I'm sure we'll publicize this that link whenever you post this video. But the other thing is, folks make one-time gifts, and of course those are substantial in any amount. And the other thing that we're doing, we have a campaign to have folks sign up to be monthly contributors. Again, that's $18.73 is the entry point. You can do 50 a month, you can do 100 a month, but to have those legions of fans at any level contributing monthly, that puts us in a position to compete, and it puts us in a position to win, And like we just said, it's not just a one-time thing. We're going to win. We're going to win some more. They're going to win some more, because that's what we decided to do. When you look at the landscape of NIL, what's Vanderbilt doing? Well, from our leadership from the top down, we said we're going to double down and make sure we're on the landscape and leading.
Yeah, that link to donate support, I'm glad you mentioned that. We'll have that out on our description here on this podcast. And it's also been floating out on social media, caringcent.org/615/3 million. And it's actually helpful if you log in. You can see that campaign set to end 6/30/2025. So 104 days remaining. 73% of the 3 million goal has been reached. So you can continue to keep track and obviously donate and answer the call. I want to ask you now, Paul, what's next here? Obviously, you mentioned the basketball work that is still to be done. Obviously, on the women's side as well, we've got the spring portal window for football that'll be opening here soon with spring practice going on. And we've got players, it's just interesting players, from the portal settling in through compliance and being able to see them practice. But what's on the horizon here for Anchor Impact, especially with like I said, the spring portal window, but postseason for the basketball programs?
Well, postseason for the basketball programs, men's and women's, again, it's about getting in front of our current and future players, and again, filling that war chest. And the other thing we're doing is taking the show on the road. Recently, we took Diego, Coach Lee, Candace, a few others down to Houston, where we did a Q&A panel style session. We're going to be doing the same thing in Atlanta soon. We'll have another event in New York City, and that's to bring the show to the folks in those areas, and also to make this appeal. So Coach Lee's already thinking about next spring's portal and what we need to be competitive then, and what we need to be doing as a collective, and what we need to be doing in as the college landscape switches to the revenue share era. But we need to be able to have a presence. And the other thing that we're doing, we're going to be announcing some new brand partnerships pretty soon with Nashville businesses. And we say that if Vanderbilt's doing business with someone, or our student athletes doing business with them, we want that business to be doing business with us. And so the program is you can have one or several or all of our student athletes become ambassadors for your business. And that's a really powerful thing. When you look at the numbers of followers some of our student athletes have. And so, of course, they can reach out to me by email, paul@vandynil.com, reach us through the website. But you'll see kind of a shift as we really focus on and highlight some of our brand partnerships that we want to have.
Ambassadors. I like it. I like that a lot. Paul, real quick here before I let you go, really appreciate the time. The men are headed to Cleveland, women headed to Durham. This is really cool. If you're headed to Cleveland, if you're headed to Durham, when you book your stay, don't forget to log on to doorsaway.com. You'll get a great price, and that will benefit Vandy NIL. How can fans do that? I know fans will be looking to get tickets and looking to travel up to Cleveland or Durham. How can they do that?
Sure, and it's real easy. You just said book your stay with Doors Away. Go to doorsaway.com, and that's something that's powered by Priceline, a partnership that we recently entered into. And with every transaction, a commission goes to Anchor Impact. So book your stay with Doors Away, doorsaway.com. And we hope to see. I was really hoping that we'd have a Friday morning game, and then it would have been possible to get over from Cleveland to Durham maybe by the evening. But
yeah,
pick one of them, and hopefully both of them are playing on that next day, and we can have that dilemma to pick one of the two again.
Looking forward to it. It all starts Friday. Their March Madness, of course, men and women's programs getting going here later this week. And don't forget doorsaway.com if you want to support Vandy NIL, their Anchor Impact here moving forward this week. Paul, really appreciate it. I know it's an exciting time, busy time for you guys. Really appreciate you taking the time, and we'll see what happens. Hopefully there's a couple of wins here later this week.
Great to be here, Billy. Thanks again. Anchor down.
That was our review with Paul Grindstaff. Always love having him on the show and diving into everything with Anchor Impact. A lot going on. Got the gift from Mark H. Carter, the matching gift. Hopefully he was able to clean that up for you guys. I was a little confused, to be honest, at first as well, but Paul really shored that up with me. And again, doorsaway.com. If you book your stay, again, it was a little late here now, but again, if you're still looking for a place to stay, book it with doorsaway.com. All right, that'll do it. Big, long episode today. Glad you guys are able to hop in. This podcast has always been free. We plan for it to stay that way. Here's how you can help us keep it that way. Give us a review and a 5-star rating. That helps us get noticed. If you're listening and haven't subscribed to Vandy247.com yet, please do. It's $99 a year or $9.99 a month. That helps us tremendously. We've got all sorts of articles, videos, previews that are up. We've got a limited time $1 VIP membership. So go ahead and hop on that. Subscribe to our Vandy247 YouTube channel. That is free. Like this video. Keep sending us your comments and questions. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Like I said, subscribe and like us on Twitter, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, however you get your podcast. Also, if you're interested in sponsoring the show, looking for a football sponsor coming up, we gotta get that going. Email Chris Lee at chrislee70@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you again soon with more episodes of the Vandy 24/7 podcast.